Shall we start?
Yes.
Okay, well, good morning. This is Coffee Talk put on by NDSU Extension Service with Burleigh County. I am the Family and Consumer Science Agent, and this is something that we do twice a week here for the summer. Today we're talking about harvesting herbs for healthy eating, kind of going from garden to table with your herbs, and there is actually literature that goes along with this class. So what they've picked are kind of the top 10 herbs that are number one, popular, number two, grow in this area, in the Zone 4 area. And this is a pretty neat presentation. It's one that was put together by the two PhDs mentioned here, so it's not my presentation, but it is by knowledgeable people. And what I like about this presentation is that it explains a lot about the growth of the herbs as well as taking it into your kitchen, which is fun. Different ways to freeze and microwave and process, and then some recipes are actually in the literature as well. I don't think they're in this presentation though. Uses of herbs is the first slide. So there's many different things that you can do with these herbs, and actually you can make it very fun. So I was just telling somebody else that I actually do use herbs for medicinal reasons, for more holistic medicinal reasons. Pest control is definitely an option. Cooking is probably the most popular. So essential, also known as, is what that means. It's not one or the other. Essential, also known as volatile oils. They are basically, you know, the reason why there's aroma and a characteristic specific to that herb. Okay, so they talk about oil may be concentrated in leaves, flowers. There may be more of this volatile oil concentration in the seeds, for example, or the roots, depending on the herb. We'll get into the specifics of each, you know, in all 10. They greatly enhance the flavor of the food, which is absolutely true. So the sooner that you use these within, especially for cooking purposes within a dish, the more flavor you're going to get out of it because of these essential volatile oils. And of course, a healthy alternative to things like sodium, even potassium chloride, which doesn't taste the best. Growing herbs, windowsill, garden plot. You can do this in your kitchen during the winter. They do need, depending on the situation, typically adequate light. They usually need sun versus shade, water, soil nutrients. So these are the things that we'll get into specific to all 10 of these herbs that are in the presentation. Different ways to grow herbs, so you don't necessarily have to start directly from seed. And there is one particular herb that I remember seeing in here that you actually have a hard time finding seed for it. So they suggest a transplant or splitting of, a flourishing plant. There are annuals, biennials. There are also perennials in this presentation. For some reason it's not on this slide, but we'll cover those that are. So the top 10 herbs that are in this presentation as well as this literature, again, from garden to table, harvesting herbs for healthy eating that you can find on the NDSU website. Okay, so we have anise, basil, chamomile, chives, coriander, also known as cilantro within reason. Coriander is typically the seed from Chinese parsley. Okay, so that was number 5. Going up to 6 is dill, garlic, lavender, oregano, and tarragon. So these are those that we'll talk about. Starting with anise, and they'll give you the Latin terminology, which is good. It is a perennial, and it was originally used by American Indians as a sweetener, so that's actually good to know. I wouldn't call it necessarily a sweetener in our definition today, but it does have a very unique flavor. It likes sun. Again, sunny locations. Each of these slides, it'll tell you the situation that it needs with the sun. Foliage is harvested for culinary purposes. Now when we say culinary purposes, let me just define it as simply it goes into your kitchen, you're cooking with it. Okay, you'll see the word cultivated in here, and that means that you're growing it in the ground. Okay, so just kind of definitions. Purple flowers attract honeybees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. So you're not only using it to cook with, but you get these fun critters that come in too, friends. Basil, lots of different types of basil. So they're calling out one specific type of basil, and different basils handle different climates. So this particular species is what they're calling out that can handle our Zone 4 climate. Okay, so it is Well, it's cold sensitive, so within reason. Okay, so I'm gonna scratch that, forgive me, it's the opposite. They chose one that isn't, but they're calling out what you can do in the house. Sorry, there was another one in here that was the opposite. Transplant when soil has warmed to 68 degrees, so that's what they're saying in this case. It doesn't like, typically we say that our critical limit to start planting here in zone 4 is about, you need to be up to 50 degrees or so Fahrenheit, and so this is something that has to be warmer. Full sun again, well-drained soil. Well-drained soil is key, just in my experience, specifically with basil. And so I planted on a higher, I have a little, my garden is on a little bit of a hill, so the stuff that's higher does drain faster, so it doesn't have a tendency to be soggy. And my basil does well up top. Regular watering via drip hose or micro irrigation. Okay, so regular watering, drip hose or ground watering is okay, as they're saying. I don't be afraid to also, spray with the hose up top versus letting it ground irrigate. This will not hurt this particular species. Discourage flowering by pinching. Okay, so don't pinch the basil, which is interesting. So it's cold sensitive as well as pinching sensitive. Harvest tender new shoots, and there are, as it says, many, many species. One of my favorite basils is just simply lemon basil, and I can't remember the species, but it's a really good culinary friend. Chamomile is also one of my favorites. I grew up doing this with my grandmother and my mother. It is an annual, as it says here, okay, but it does not have a problem thriving in the wild, even on the east side of our pasture. We have a bunch of it. And you will see this at a lot of farmers markets, which is fun. So if this goes well into a tea, as it says on the bottom, which calmed Peter Rabbit down after eating Mr. McGregor's garden, which I think is a cute point. It is something that calms you and the level of stress. It says it's a sedative tea. I think that's a strong term. It's more of a de-stressor, and you'll see a lot of chamomiles in nighttime teas. Chives. Chives are fantastic, and I think the opposite of what I just said, hardy perennial is an excellent term for this. Hardy is truly the case. I don't think there is a single chive plant that I've ever planted up here in this North Dakota weather that has not come back and thrived and seeded upon seeded itself. We actually have some out in our little bins out in front of the office. Sow the seed directly into the site. Okay, so what they're saying is this is a seedling versus something that you want to split off a thriving plant. It can handle starting from seed easily. Often used as border plant and grown in pot or windowsill culture. So this is one that you can grow in your house, inside or out. Coriander is grown for aromatic fruit seeds. Specifically, when we talk about coriander, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about seeds. So it grows into a beautiful cilantro plant, grown for foliage. Other common names, okay, is why it's giving you several up top, and you can sow this directly into your garden. Popular in about every major cuisine, and there are a couple different types of cilantro used in the culinary world. As they reference it, sometimes they'll say it's Mexican oregano or Mexican cilantro, or they'll also say Italian, where it was actually grown, because some people claim that they can taste the difference relative to the volatile oils we talked about. Aphrodisiac and love potion in Middle Ages, which is interesting. Used in traditional and Chinese medicine as a diuretic, a tonic. A couple other terms here for the people that are interested in the Chinese Eastern medicine. Okay, so dill is one of my favorite, and I think it talks about, I don't remember if it's here or not, but dill is one of those that we use a lot up in the north, but I think that it doesn't quite get as much table time, in the south as it does up here. So one of the articles I was reading about dill yesterday to learn about the Tetra and Ducat cultivars down here, it said that it just doesn't get as much playtime as as cilantro or basil would, and it's probably true. Dill has a fantastic flavor. So it's considered an annual, but I will tell you that it has come back in my garden. So sometimes, those seeds will thrive the next year depending on the soil situation as well as the previous year's winter climate. Seeds, leaves, seeds with umbels are all utilized. Now the umbels term, if you're not familiar with it, means that it's the flowering portion. So in other words, you can use all portions of this plant that are mentioned, that is. I mean, probably not the stalk, but it thrives in cool winter, or in cool weather, like I said, so it does okay. And a couple of the last 4 years, I did have dill come back. Okay. So this is something that you want to get in early spring. If using granary, not seed, you want to select the slow bolting cultivars, okay? Cultivars. So in other words, this the cultivar terminology is just, as I had defined earlier, something that you would plant yourself, you would cultivate and grow. Okay, so I think I just turned off my clicker. There we go. Let's make sure that I didn't go too far. All right. So garlic. Garlic is very highly known, I would say. It's fall planted perennial, and I have to tell you, my grandparents grow amazing garlic. Their bulbs are huge. I've never seen anything bigger. I think they should probably just have a stand at the farmer's market just for garlic. So harvest when foliage begins to flag or turn yellow, which is true, definitely. So late August, early September. So you let it cure a day or two, just let it stand, and a shady place with good air circulation because it's very aromatic. Storage, braid foliage together and hang in kitchen for convenience, and that's how you'll see it actually when it comes to Italian style home decoration, and it's because that's how it does well. And they're kidding when they say it discourages vampires. I would hope, actually. Propagating, okay, so use larger outside cloves of bulb. Plant 3 inches below soil, and that's why I say I love their garlic, because it's so easy to plant because it just has these really large, beautiful bulbs. And typically they're saying after Columbus Day in the fall. Okay, so last year I experimented myself a little bit with lavender, and I didn't do so hot, but this was helpful to go through this presentation even for myself. So it's best to consider an annual. But for some reason, my husband's mom, hers are perennial. They come back. She does really good with these. So for overwinter success, plant it, and as it's saying, this is what you can do to consider it a perennial. You plant in soil with excellent drainage. Direct seed by burying seed of 1/4 of an inch deep, okay? Propagate by stem cuttings, which is great for me to learn, and then in the spring, shear plants back heavily to stimulate new growth. Okay, like other members of mint family, so this is in the mint family, does not need high levels of fertility, which is good to know. Flowers last about a week and attract butterflies, hummingbirds, and honeybees. And this does really, really well, as the next bullet point says. Air-dried flowers can retain their aroma for several weeks. And so this is used in a lot of aromatherapy and a lot of your expensive perfumes that are alcohol-based out there. Okay. On to oregano now. Let's see here. Okay, this isn't quite in the same order, but if we're going off of this spreadsheet, it's the second to last herb that we'll be talking about. So also there are many species of oregano, and this is the one that they chose to talk about. Now this one happens to be a perennial, depending on location and state. And I was just telling somebody earlier that I was able to, in the last few years, get my oregano to come back one of those years, so something was right. Specifically probably the type, the species. The flavor and aroma is enhanced in culinary, specifically Italian dishes. I have a little bit of experience on the oregano side of things when it comes to food processing as well. I used to work on a pizza product that we had to go in and taste the differences depending on where the oregano was grown in the world, so that we got the right flavor in the sauces that we would make. So sunny location is what this particular plant needs, pretty much all the species need. Transplant outdoors when frost threats have passed. And let me just stop because of this bullet point. A lot of these herbs do much better when you start them in warmer climates, greenhouses, inside of your home, inside of your kitchen, and they need transplant outside. So I would suggest that if you want your herbs to thrive year one, to start them inside and then transplant, and that's what they're saying specific for this one here. One thing I didn't know until I looked at this presentation is that at the end of your growing season, add phosphorus and potassium. Okay, the soil. Tarragon should be our last herb as we're breaking down the 10 specific that we've chosen for this presentation. And here, this was interesting. So there's French tarragon, not Russian tarragon. Is specifically hardy in Fargo, as they're calling out here for the NDSU Extension Service. But that would also apply to, you know, the state of North Dakota and other areas if given winter protection. So what they're saying is that French is going to do much better than Russian. Okay, so French, it's grown in full sun or part shade. This is one of the first herbs that we've seen part shade. French cannot be purchased as seed, and it must be transplanted or divided, which I thought was enlightening. A distinct licorice scent, and one thing that goes, you know, there's all kinds of sauces that go well with tarragon. Tarragon is something that we don't talk about very often until you get deep into using, you know, bringing out your culinary side and looking into recipes. And tarragon does really well with béarnaise sauce and, you know, not necessarily hollandaise sauce, but those types of A's sauces that are you know, fat and protein based with eggs and mayonnaise or oil. Harvesting herbs. So we're going to get into, now that you know about the herbs and you've grown the herbs, what can we do with them? And you know, this is a neat and very enlightening presentation. It even gives you, like I said, microwave options. So when you harvest, it's best to harvest before the heat of the day and after the dew is off. And I'm not sure exactly of the reasoning behind that. I could probably ask those who wrote this presentation, but I can tell you that it's likely because of the state of the volatile oils, because that's what you're seeking in these herbs. Herbs suitable for container gardening. Okay, so these do well in containers. Windowsills or pots, for example, versus a garden, you know, cultivation situation. Place pots in sunny window and care for them like houseplants. Rosemary was on there, but we haven't elaborated about that one. Okay, are herbs nutritious? Add flavor but not caloric and little nutritional value. Okay, so depends on how you define that word nutritious, but there aren't necessarily nutritional value like your vitamins and minerals would add, but they certainly don't add to your calorie levels or your milligrams of sodium levels or things of that nature when you're trying to promote a heart-healthy cooking diet. Okay, it allows cutting down on the amount of fat and salt in recipes, as I mentioned before. How do you use herbs? Oops, let's go back. How do you use herbs? Fresh herbs, okay, you want to make sure and rinse them well. Use a pair of scissors or sharp knife to cut in tiny pieces. And if you want to know how to use specific herbs, there's quite a bit of information out there, and you can check our NDSU website. You know, for example, thyme, there's a way to get it off the stalk really easily and quickly. Dried herbs, crumble herbs or use a mortar and pestle to grind into a powder, which is an excellent idea, but you have to get to the point in which they're dry first. How much should you use? This is completely relative and completely arbitrary, you know, to your tongue, and also to, if you're using for medicinal purposes, to a recipe. Okay, so the general rule, though, that they're trying to give you, because we could just say it just depends, you know, it's up to you. The general rule is 2 tablespoons fresh equals about 3/4 teaspoons dried, and that equals about a 1/4 teaspoon powdered, because of the size difference. Okay, categorizing herbs by flavor intensity. Strong herbs, they're giving you, you know, bay leaves, rosemary, and sage. Typically, you would use it 1 teaspoon for every 6 servings, so every 6 people that you're making a stew for example. Rosemary is extremely, I would say, it's there. If it's there, you can taste it. And it's typically used in Italian dishes. I think it does well when it's paired with olive oil because it calms the volatiles a little bit and disperses them through the dish. Moderate, you could consider basil, dill, mint, marjoram, and oregano is modern. And in this case, you would use double the dose, okay, 2 teaspoons. And then we have mild, chives and parsley, and they can be used generously. And you know, you can chew on a piece of chive when you're outside and you'll get much more of the flavor because it's not diluted in a dish, but you can use quite a bit on a potato, for example. To experience the flavor of herbs, you definitely want to cut into that herb, okay? So that's when it's released from the cells of the plant. So chop or crush fresh herb finely. The more fine you do, the more volatiles that you'll get. Add a small amount to a tablespoon of softened butter or cream cheese, which is an excellent idea. You'll see there's a couple of restaurants in town that it's hard to find regular butter. The butter always has parsley in it, okay, and sometimes garlic. Allow to stand 1 hour after you have added so that it can disperse, and then you can spread on a cracker or a piece of bread. So today the Bismarck at Farmers Market is open down in Saratoga Park, and this is, I hope there's some herbs down there today. What herb goes with what food? Be adventuresome, but don't use the same herb in multiple foods in the same meal. That's probably true, just from a pairing standpoint. An example would be basil. Could go into tomatoes, pasta, rice, beef stew. I'll let you read those different ones there. Okay. When should you add herbs? During food preparation. This is a good one. Hot foods. Add fresh herbs toward the end of cooking because you're going to break down the volatiles and they will go off into the air of the product because typically those are a low volatility, you know, from these herbs. So they will be cooked away if you add them too early. Flavor can be lost with extended cooking, as I mentioned. And then cold dishes add several hours ahead of time because you're not breaking down from a chemical standpoint the oils as readily. So hot foods late, cold foods early so that it can disperse. How can you preserve herbs? Air drying, oven dehydrator drying, okay, so like your food dehydrators, microwave drying, freezing. All those ways are pulling out moisture and concentrating the oils. Air drying. Let's go into the specifics. It actually breaks it down a little bit for those 4 different categories. Pick at peak just before they blossom. When dew is off in the morning or after sunset before dew forms. So for me, it's typically about a month and a half in. Cilantro is different. It starts flowering really, really early. But that's kind of a rule of thumb just in this climate area. Bunch and hang upside down in well-ventilated dark space for about 2 weeks. Be sure they're completely dry or mold can form, and that's very important. Oven dehydrator drying, okay, so in this case we're talking about a food dehydrator. Optimum temperature is 100 degrees or lowest setting, so you want to be at that low temperature so that you're not, let's just use the term loosely, cooking off the volatiles, okay? Set fan nearby for circulation. Test hourly, and herbs should be brittle, and that's how you know that they're dry. In dehydrator, follow manufacturer's directions because they've probably consulted the right people before they've written their literature. Microwave drying, I thought this was pretty innovative. Place a few bunches of herbs between microwave safe paper toweling, okay? So your herbs would go in the middle of a bottom and top paper towel. Microwave on high, 1 to 3 minutes, testing every 30 seconds, and again, your litmus test is that it's dry and brittle. Freezing. Okay, wash and pat dry. This is typically what I end up doing versus drying, so I think maybe this year I'm going to try out the other 3 methods. But wash and pat dry, place in airtight freezer bags and freeze. Label with contents and date, which is good to know, you know, so that you can rotate first in, first out. Or place chopped herbs in ice cube tray sections. Cover with water and freeze. Place in labeled bags. Use entire cube in soups and stews. And that's what I did last year, and it's fantastic. I still have some, and they're just as fresh, it seems like. How should herbs be stored and how long? Well, you want to control the amount of oxygen in anything that you store. So store in airtight containers like jars or sealed bags. Place in a convenient spot. And for best flavor, use within a year. That's really a rule of thumb for anything frozen. Which is good that we have a growing season every year. Are herb flavored oils safe to make? Yes. However, there is a botulism risk anytime that you take out oxygen, okay? When low acid ingredients, let me just read this statement so that I don't confuse you. Botulism risk is when low acid ingredients like herbs, okay, are placed in low oxygen environment like a sealed jar of oil without added acid. So what they're saying here, the first real life example that comes to mind for me is that if you're making a tomato sauce, okay, and tomatoes they decrease the pH, so they're an acidic food now, a higher acid food, okay? So if you are able to put these herbs into a tomato sauce, you're okay. You're not as much at risk for botulism because the other synergistic effect of the ingredients are helping to store this food. But if you are using just oil, which is not a high acid food, it's a low acid food, then you have to be careful in the way that you seal the jars. So that's another presentation though. Okay, so they are saying that this could be a risk if you're flavoring them in oils, like a lot of people would do with rosemary. Should only be safely prepared for fresh use in this case is what we're suggesting. Refrigerate at all times and used within 3 days. Okay, so they want you to, basically you're making this to use it, like restaurants would do. Are herb flavored vinegars safe to make? Yes, okay. Yes, the acidity of vinegar prevents the growth of microorganisms. See handout for web address for guide to making flavored vinegar. Like I said, that's another presentation. Do culinary herbs act like herbal supplements? This is one that I appreciate. Most are different substances used in different amounts. Herbal supplements should be used with caution, okay, because they're not always FDA approved and researched. They're not regulated as strictly as foods or drugs. So if you choose to use them that way, do your homework. Discuss with your healthcare provider if necessary. You can check out this website, www.consumerlab.com, for companies and products that have passed content and efficacy tests. Look for USP or GMP designation on label, and what that means is that these herbal supplements were made under good manufacturing practices. I should use this red dot here, so that they were produced in a food safe, savvy environment. Do your homework with herbal supplements. Again, use only as directed. Stop if you note any side effects, which is the case with anything. With culinary herbs, only precaution is to avoid if allergies toward the particular herb exist, which is definitely a concern. And that is our presentation today. Thank you for joining us on the garden to table herbs subject. Thank you.